Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku wielded Mjolnir and joined the Avengers. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in the unforeseen simulation joint was a toxic cocktail of scents. The sharp, metallic tang of blood, the acrid bite of pulverized concrete, and the damp, cloying smell of chlorinated water. For Izuku Midoriya, crouched behind a decorative fountain in the central plaza, it was the smell of absolute failure. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest. His fingers, grotesquely swollen and painted in a nauseating palette of purple and black, were a testament to his power and his powerlessness. One for all, the sacred torch passed to him by the symbol of peace, was a sun trapped in a glass jar. Every time he tried to let its light shine, the glass threatened to shatter. And he, the jar, was fragile. His gaze was locked on the scene unfolding 50 yards away, near the edge of the shipwreck zone. Shota Aizawa, his homeroom teacher and the formidable pro-hero Eraserhead, was a broken marionette on the ground. One arm was bent at an angle that defied anatomy, his face a mess of blood and swelling. But the most horrifying part was his elbow, which was flaking away like sun-dried clay, a gruesome trophy of Tamura Shigaraki's decay quirk. Shigaraki himself was a nightmare-given form. A lanky figure draped in disembodied hands, he scratched furiously at his neck, his visible eye alight with a childish, psychopathic glee. He was the conductor of this symphony of chaos, and his orchestra had but one instrument, the Noma. It was a monster. A behemoth of dark purple muscle, its brain exposed and pulsating, its eyes wide and vacant like a doll's. It stood over Aizawa, its raw physical power an insult to the very concept of human limitation. It had broken their teacher, a hero who could nullify the quirks of others, with nothing but brute force. It moved faster than the eye could see and hit with the force of a freight train. It was, Shigaraki had gleefully proclaimed, designed specifically to kill All Might. And right now, it was turning its dead-eyed gaze towards Tsuyu Azuri. Kero, the sound was so small, so lost in the vast, cavernous space of the USJ. Tsu was in the water, only her head and hands visible. Minoru Mineta, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror, was clinging to her back, his panicked sobs swallowed by the ambient dread. Deku's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. Move! The command screamed through his mind, a silent, desperate shriek. Do something! You're a hero! You have All Might's power! Move! But his body was frozen. Not by fear alone, but by the cold, hard logic that his frantic brain couldn't help but process. He had used his quirk 4 times. 4 finger flicks. The result? 4 shattered fingers and villains who were momentarily inconvenienced at best. If he used it again, with his arm or a leg, the limb would be destroyed. He would be a liability, another victim for the villains to deal with. He was a checkmate in 3 moves, and he'd already wasted 2. You know, it's a shame. Shigaraki's raspy voice echoed, dripping with casual cruelty. I really wanted All Might to see this, to see his precious students, his little symbols of hope, turned into red stains on the floor. But he's late. So very, very late. I guess a warm-up is in order. Nomu, killed the frog. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing. The Noma's head twitched, its bird-like beak pointing directly at Tsuyu. There was no malice in its posture, no anger. There was only the cold, terrifying finality of a programmed command being executed. Tsuyu's wide, dark eyes met Deku's from across the plaza. In them, he didn't see accusation or disappointment. He saw fear. Honest, quiet fear. And in that moment, something inside him snapped. Logic be damned. Self-preservation be damned. She is a person who needs saving. That was the core of it, the single, unshakable truth at the center of his being. It was the same instinct that had sent him, a quirkless nobody, running towards a sludge villain to save Katsuki Bakugo. Green lightning, wild and untamed, began to crackle around his right arm. He felt the familiar, agonizing pressure building, the sensation of his bones grinding against each other, threatening to turn to powder. He ignored it. He pushed past the pain, drawing on a deeper well of one for all than he ever had before. The power was a roaring inferno, and he was nothing but kindling, but he would burn if it meant creating enough light to save her. I am... A voice, his own yet not his own, started to form in his throat, a desperate echo of his idol. The Noma lunged, and reality broke. It didn't start with a sound. It started with a feeling. A deep, resonant hum that vibrated in Deku's very bones, a frequency utterly alien to this world. A pinprick of caustic blue light appeared in the air between the Nomu and Tsuyu. It was the color of a gas flame, but infinitely more intense, a light that seemed to cast shadows of its own. For a microsecond, everything froze. Shigaraki paused his scratching. The Nomu, in its unstoppable lunge, seemed to hang in the air. Deku's own surge of power hitched, the green lightning on his arm flickering in response to the blue intrusion. Then the pinprick tore open. It was not a gate or a portal. It was a wound in the fabric of space-time. A jagged, shrieking fissure of non-existence. Through it, Deku saw things that his mind couldn't process. Fractured images of a sterile laboratory, a man in a pristine white coat screaming, a glimpse of a glowing blue cube pulsing with immense energy. A metallic voice, cold and guttural, whispered a single word. Heil. The universe seemed to be trying to reject the anomaly, but the combined forces at play were too great. The raw, kinetic power of the Noma's charge, a singularity of physical force, slammed into the tear. Simultaneously, Deku's desperate, uncontrolled surge of one for all, a torrent of stockpiled energy, latched onto it like a magnet. The two forces, one of brute strength and one of heroic legacy, acted as an anchor and a tow line, ripping the wound wider and pulling Deku towards it. The sensation was indescribable. It was like being pulled through a keyhole by his soul. The air was ripped from his lungs. The sounds of the USJ, Shigaraki's confused shout, Minetta's shriek, the splash of water, were compressed into a single, sharp crack and then vanished, replaced by a deafening roar that was both everything and nothing. His vision smeared into a kaleidoscope of impossible colors. He saw streaks of his own green lightning interwoven with that searing, alien blue. He saw his life flash before his eyes, his mother's worried face, All Might's skeletal form, Bakugo's explosive glare, Uraraka's bright smile, all of it shattering like broken glass. He felt the immense, raw power of the Noma wash over him, not as an impact, but as a current, dragging him deeper into the vortex. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. He was spat out of the chaos, tumbling through the air before crashing into something soft and wet. The impact was jarring, knocking what little breath he had left from his body. For a long moment, he lay there, face down in mud, every cell in his body screaming. A torrential downpour was soaking him to the bone, each cold drop a fresh shock to his system. He pushed himself up, his arms trembling violently. The green lightning of One for All had vanished, the immense power he'd summoned having been siphoned off into the void. His arm, miraculously, wasn't broken, but it felt weak, hollowed out. His whole body was a geography of pain. His shattered fingers throbbed with a deep, pulsating agony, and a dozen new bruises were making themselves known from his violent landing. His mind was a maelstrom of confusion. He wasn't in the USJ. The sterile, controlled environment was gone, replaced by a forest. Towering trees with dark, needle-like leaves loomed over him like ancient sentinels. The ground was a carpet of damp soil, fallen leaves, and slick, moss-covered rocks. The air smelled of pine, wet earth, and ozone. It was a clean, natural smell, so utterly different from the artificial air of the dome that it made him dizzy. "Where?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "What happened?" Panic began to set in, a cold tide rising in his chest. "Aizawa-sensei! Azuri! Mineta!" he called out, his voice swallowed by the steady drumming of the rain. "Kurogyri! Did his warp gate?" No, that wasn't right. Kurogyri's portals were smooth, dark, and precise. This had been violent, chaotic, a screaming tear in the world. The terrifying truth began to dawn on him. He was alone. Utterly and completely alone. He had been in the middle of a fight. His friends were in mortal danger, and he was gone. He had vanished. He had failed them. A sob caught in his throat, thick with guilt and terror. He had to get back. He had to. He scrambled to his feet, his tattered green costume clinging to him like a second skin, and spun around, desperately searching for any sign of the rift, any flicker of unnatural light. There was nothing. Just the endless, indifferent trees and the falling rain. He was lost. His gaze swept the dark woods, and that's when he saw it. A strange, unnatural light piercing through the gloom. Not the searing blue from before, but a softer, pulsing azure glow. It was coming from a clearing about 100 feet away. Hope, fragile and desperate, fluttered in his chest. Maybe it was a way back. Maybe it was the source of whatever had happened. He stumbled through the undergrowth, branches whipping at his face and snagging on his torn costume. As he got closer, he saw that the light was emanating from a small crater, as if a meteor had recently impacted the earth. The soil around the rim was scorched and glassy, and a faint mist rose from the center, glowing with that ethereal light. He slid down the muddy slope into the crater, his boots sinking into the soft earth. There, nestled at the very bottom, was the source of the light. It was a hammer. It was a blocky, formidable-looking thing, forged from a metal that seemed to drink the surrounding gloom. It was a dull, silvery gray, its surface covered in intricate, swirling patterns that seemed to shift in the faint light. The handle was short, wrapped in worn brown leather, with a simple loop at the end. It wasn't glowing itself, but the air around it was charged, ionized, causing the mist to fluoresce. It looked ancient, powerful, and profoundly out of place. Deku stared at it, his analytical mind kicking in despite his panic. Is this a weapon? Some kind of support item? Did a villain throw it here? It didn't make any sense. A twig snapped behind him. Deku whirled around, dropping into a low, shaky fighting stance. His heart leaped into his throat. Villains? Had they followed him? Two men stood at the edge of the crater, silhouetted against the dark woods. They weren't wearing costumes. They were dressed in rugged civilian clothes, flannel shirts, worn jeans, and heavy boots. One was burly, with a thick, unkempt beard, and the other was wiry and weasel-faced. They looked less like supervillains and more like criminals of a more mundane, and somehow more unsettling, variety. Well, looky here, Earl, the wiry one said, his voice a low drawl. Looks like we weren't the only ones who saw the light show. The burly one, Earl, grunted, his eyes fixated on the hammer in the crater. What is that thing? Some kind of government drone? Who cares? It fell from the sky. It's gotta be worth something. The wiry man's gaze shifted to Deku. He looked him up and down, taking in the shredded green costume, the tear-streaked face, the mangled fingers. A nasty, predatory smile spread across his face. And look, a little lost cosplayer. You okay there, kid? Did you fall down and go boom? Deku didn't answer. He stayed low, assessing the threat. They didn't seem to have quirks, or at least, they weren't displaying any obvious signs. But they were big, and they were radiating a casual menace that set every nerve on edge. Hey! He ain't listening to you, Ricky, Earl grumbled. Maybe he's scared. Ricky sneered, taking a step closer. Don't worry, kid. We're not gonna hurt ya. We just want the space rock. You hand that over, and we'll even give you a ride back to town. Deku knew a lie when he heard one. His eyes darted around, looking for an escape route, but the crater walls were steep and slick with mud. He was trapped. Then, a small cry came from the woods behind the men. Hello? Is someone there? Please, I'm lost. All three of them turned. A young woman, looking no older than 20, stumbled into the clearing. She was soaked to the bone, her hiking gear muddy and torn. Her face was pale with exhaustion and fear. Oh, thank God, she breathed, her eyes landing on the two men. I got separated from my group hours ago. My phone's dead. Can you help me? Ricky's smile widened, and it was a terrible thing to see. Well, look at that, Earl. A damsel in distress. He turned his attention fully to the woman, taking a predatory step towards her. Sure, sweetheart, we can help you. The woman's brief expression of relief curdled into fear as she registered the look in his eyes. She took an instinctive step back. Something inside Deku, that core, unshakable truth, ignited once more. A person needs saving. His own fear, his own pain, his own confusion, it all became secondary. He was injured, His power was unreliable, he was in a strange world he didn't understand. None of it mattered. That woman was in danger, he had no weapon. His quirk would destroy him. He was helpless. His gaze fell back to the hammer. It was just a lump of metal. A tool. But it was the only thing he had. As Ricky took another step towards the terrified hiker, Deku moved. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He acted. He scrambled to the center of the crater, his hands reaching for the leather-wrapped handle. "Hey! Get away from that, you little freak!" Uro bellowed, starting to slide down into the crater after him. Deku's fingers closed around the grip. The world exploded in light and sound. The instant his skin touched the leather, a jolt shot up his arm. It wasn't the agonizing pain of one for all, nor the jarring shock of electricity. It was a feeling of connection. Of being seen. A billion ancient whispers seemed to echo in the hollows of his mind, a chorus of voices speaking in a tongue of thunder and starlight. At the forefront, one clear, sonorous voice spoke an edict that resonated with the very marrow of his bones. "Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor." Worthy? A small part of his mind, the part that still sounded like a quirkless, crying child, whimpered. "I'm not worthy. I'm useless. I failed." But the hammer disagreed. As his fingers tightened, the green lightning of One for All, dormant and hidden, roared back to life. It didn't build with agonizing pressure this time. It was drawn out of him, summoned by the hammer as if it were an old friend. The emerald energy surged down his arm, crackling and spitting. But it wasn't alone. From the hammer itself, a second energy erupted, a brilliant, electric blue, the color of a clear winter sky and a raging thunderstorm. It was the power of the cosmos, the fury of the storm, the magic of a forgotten age. The two powers, green and blue, legacy and divinity, met at his fist. They did not fight. They did not collide. They intertwined. They danced, weaving together into a spectacular, swirling braid of viridian and azure light that enveloped his entire arm. He felt the immeasurable power of One for All, a force that always threatened to tear him apart, flowing through the Uru metal of the hammer. The hammer acted as a perfect conduit, a flawless channel, containing and amplifying the energy without a single tremor of protest. The strain on his body vanished, replaced by an incredible, exhilarating surge of pure, unadulterated power. He lifted. The hammer, which should have been impossibly heavy, rose from the mud as if it were lighter than air, and the sky answered. A deafening, world-shattering crack of thunder exploded directly overhead, so powerful it shook the very ground. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical blow that sent Earl, who was halfway down the crater slope, tumbling backward. The rain, which had been a steady downpour, intensified into a raging tempest, the wind howling through the trees. Deku stood up, the hammer held firmly in his hand. The combined green and blue lightning swirled around him, casting his shadow, long and heroic, against the crater wall. He looked at the two stunned, terrified men and the shocked hiker. For the first time since arriving in this strange, hostile world, he didn't feel scared. He didn't feel weak. He felt the weight of the hammer in his hand, a weight that was both immense and nothing at all. He felt strong. He felt worthy. The two thugs, Ricky and Earl, scrambled to their feet, their predatory grins replaced with slack-jawed terror. They stared at the boy, this small teenager in a ridiculous, tattered rabbit costume, now wreathed in a divine storm, holding a weapon that defied all logic. What the hell are you?" Ricky stammered, taking a clumsy step back. Deku didn't answer. He simply raised the hammer, its head crackling with untamed power, and took a single, resolute step forward. That was all the encouragement they needed. With yelps of terror, the two men turned and fled, crashing through the undergrowth and disappearing into the rain-swept darkness. The storm began to subside as soon as the threat was gone. The torrential rain softened back to a steady drizzle. The thunder faded to a low rumble in the distance. The swirling vortex of green and blue lightning around Deku's arm receded, sinking back into the hammer and into himself, leaving only a faint, pleasant warmth. He stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, the hammer still humming with latent power in his hand. He looked at it, then at his own hand. No pain. No broken bones. Only strength. Are you okay? He looked up. The hiker was cautiously approaching him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. Deku opened his mouth to reply, to reassure her, but his throat was dry. What could he possibly say? Before he could find the words, a new sound cut through the forest. The high-pitched screech of tires on wet asphalt, followed by the slam of car doors. Bright headlights cut through the rain, pinning both him and the hiker in their beams. A sleek, black vehicle, emblazoned with a silver eagle emblem he didn't recognize, had pulled up on a nearby service road. Two figures in black tactical gear got out, weapons held at a low ready. A third man emerged from the passenger side. He was of average height, wearing a simple, immaculate dark suit that seemed utterly impervious to the rain. His hair was neatly combed, his face calm and professional. He walked forward with an air of unassuming authority, his eyes taking in the entire scene in a single, sweeping glance, the crater, the shaken hiker, and finally, resting on Izuku Midoriya. The man's calm expression faltered. His eyes widened, just for a second, and his gaze was locked on the object in Deku's hand. He stopped about 20 feet away, a look of profound, unmitigated disbelief on his face. He seemed to recognize the hammer. "Well?" Agent Phil Coulson said, his voice a quiet murmur against the patter of the rain, a perfect blend of professional detachment and pure, unadulterated shock. "I'll be damned." The world had narrowed to the space between Izuku Midoriya and the man in the immaculate suit. The rain continued its steady, percussive rhythm on the ground, on the black car, on the shoulders of the strange man's suit, yet he seemed entirely unbothered by it. His gaze was fixed, not on Izuku, but on the hammer in his hand. It was a look of such profound, analytical shock that it cut through Izuku's own haze of confusion. "Ma'am," the man in the suit said, his voice calm and even, never taking his eyes off the hammer. He addressed the hiker, who was still standing frozen a few feet away. "My name is Agent Coulson. I'm with the Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement, and Logistics Division. You're safe now. If you'll come with my colleagues, they'll get you somewhere warm and dry." He gestured with a slight nod of his head, and one of the tactical agents approached the woman, speaking in low, reassuring tones. She glanced nervously at Izuku, a boy wreathed in the ghost of a divine storm, and then allowed herself to be guided toward the black vehicle. She was safe. The immediate mission was complete. Now, Izuku was the mission. He tightened his grip on Mjolnir's leather handle. The hammer felt like an extension of his own arm, a permanent and vital part of him. It hummed with a quiet energy, a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to soothe the frantic fluttering in his chest. "Son," Agent Coulson said, finally meeting Izuku's eyes. His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes held a universe of questions. "I don't suppose you'd be willing to tell me where you got that?" Izuku stared at him, his mind racing. "Agent? Logistics Division?" The words were English, a language he only partially understood from his hero-centric studies and pop culture osmosis. He caught the gist, but the nuances were lost. He was a representative of some official body. A hero? A government official? He clutched Mjolnir tighter, pulling it closer to his chest like a shield. "Dare Disuka? Who are you?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Koko wa doko Disuka? Where is this place?" Coulson's professional mask didn't slip, but a flicker of complication crossed his face. "Right. Language barrier. Of course." He held up his hands in a placating gesture. "We're not going to hurt you. We just need you to come with us. We need to understand what happened here." He spoke slowly, using simple gestures, pointing at Izuku then at the car. "The universal language of come with me." Izuku hesitated. His every instinct screamed that he needed to get back to the USJ, that Shigaraki and the Noma were still there, that his friends were in danger. But how? He was lost in a foreign land, holding a mythical weapon, facing armed men from an organization he'd never heard of. He had no other options. The path back to his world was not here in this muddy forest. Perhaps these people could help. They seemed official. They seemed organized. With a deep, shuddering breath, he gave a small, jerky nod. The ride in the black SUV was the longest, most silent journey of Izuku's life. He sat in the back, sandwiched between two tactical agents who smelled of rain and gunpowder. They didn't look at him, but he could feel the weight of their attention, their bodies tense and ready. Mjolnir sat on the seat beside him, taking up an entire space. One of the agents had initially made a move to take it, but Izuku had let out a panicked cry and a spark of green-blue lightning had crackled from his knuckles. They hadn't tried again. He stared out the window as the vehicle sped down a dark, wet highway. The road signs were in English, the cars different from the ones he knew, the entire landscape subtly alien. It was like watching a foreign movie, except he was the terrified, unwilling star. Every passing mile was another mile away from home, from All Might, from his mother, from Ye. He felt a tear trace a path through the grime on his cheek. He wiped it away angrily. Heroes don't cry. But he didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a lost child. The vehicle eventually pulled into a nondescript hangar, the large door sliding shut behind them with an ominous boom, sealing them off from the outside world. The hangar opened into a sprawling underground complex. The air instantly changed, becoming sterile, cool, and dry. It hummed with the low thrum of industrial ventilation and hidden machinery. Walls were polished concrete and brushed steel, the lighting a stark, shadowless white. Agents in suits and lab coats moved with quiet, efficient purpose, their paths intersecting like lines of code. It was intimidating. It was S.H.I.E.L.D. He was led through a series of corridors, his muddy footprints a stark violation of the pristine floors. He was eventually shown into a room that was surprisingly comfortable. It had a soft couch, a table, and a chair. One wall, however, was a large, dark pane of glass. A one-way mirror. He knew what this was. An observation room. An interrogation room. He sat on the couch, placing Mjolnir carefully on the cushion beside him. He wouldn't let it out of his sight. It was his only proof that he wasn't completely insane. A few minutes later, Agent Coulson entered, holding a tablet. He offered Izuku a faint, reassuring smile. "We've arranged for a translator," he said, his voice calm. A speaker in the ceiling crackled to life. "Can you hear me?" A synthesized female voice asked, speaking perfect, unaccented Japanese. Izuku jolted, his head snapping up. "Yes. Yes, I can hear you," he replied, a wave of relief washing over him. The simple act of being understood was like a lifeline. "Good," Coulson said, his English seamlessly translated. "My name is Agent Coulson. Can you tell us your name?" "Midoriya." "Izuku Midoriya," he said, his voice stronger now. "All right, Izuku Midoriya. Let's start with the obvious. That hammer. Where did you get it?" And so, he tried to explain. He spoke of his world, a world where 80% of the population was born with supernatural abilities called quirks. He described Yue High School, the premier academy for training pro-heroes. He talked about All Might, the symbol of peace, a pillar of hope for their society. His explanation grew more frantic and desperate as he recounted the events of the last hour, the villain attack on the USJ, his teacher being gravely injured, the monster called Nomu, his friends being targeted. He talked about the strange rift, the tearing of reality. He explained how he was pulled through, a victim of circumstance, and how he landed here, in this world. Through the one-way mirror, Nick Fury, director of S.H.I.E.L.D., stood with his arms crossed, his single eye narrowed in intense concentration. Beside him, Agent Maria Hill monitored the boy's biometrics on a screen. Heart rate elevated but steadying. No signs of physiological deception. Quirks. Pro-heroes. A symbol of peace, Fury muttered, his voice a low rumble. Either this kid has the most elaborate, stress-induced psychosis I've ever seen, or we've just stumbled into a trans-dimensional incident of the highest order. "And the hammer, sir?" Hill asked. "That's the part that keeps this from being a simple psych evaluation." Fury grunted. "Coulson's report is confirmed. The object is a perfect material match for the remnants we recovered after the destroyer incident. It is Mjolnir. Or a Mjolnir anyway." He tapped a comm in his ear. "Stark, Rogers, Romanoff, my office. Now, and somebody get me a line to Asgard. Tell Heimdall it's an Excalibur situation. He'll know what it means." Back in the observation room, Coulson listened patiently to Izuku's fantastic story. He didn't mock, he didn't interrupt. He just listened. "So you're saying, Coulson summarized when Izuku finally ran out of breath, that you were pulled from your dimension during an attack, and you appeared here, where you found this hammer and were able to lift it? Yes. It's the truth, I swear. Izuku pleaded. I need to get back. My friends, they're in danger. You have to help me. Coulson's face was unreadable. A teenager from another dimension, wielding the mythical hammer of a Norse god, he said in English, more to himself than to Izuku. It's not even the weirdest Tuesday I've had. The door to the observation room slid open. Izuku flinched, his hand instinctively going to Mjolnir. 3 people entered. The first was a man with a sharp goatee, an expensive-looking suit, and an aura of supreme, unshakable confidence. His eyes, quick and intelligent, weren't on Izuku, but were devouring the hammer with an almost hungry curiosity. Izuku recognized him from a magazine he'd seen online once. The billionaire, Tony Stark. The second was a tall, broad-shouldered man with blonde hair and a face that seemed etched with a quiet, earnest gravity. He was wearing a uniform of red, white, and blue, with a prominent star on the chest. He looked like something straight out of a pre-Quark-era comic book, a walking, talking symbol of patriotism and strength. Captain America. The third was a woman with striking red hair, her face impassive and her movements fluid and silent. She wore a black tactical suit, and her green eyes missed nothing. They swept over Izuku, assessing him not as a boy, but as a collection of threats and possibilities. The Black Widow. Izuku's jaw went slack. He knew them. Not personally, but he was a hero nerd. He had researched pre-Quark history, the dawn of a heroic age in other countries. The Avengers. They were legends, figures from history books in his world. And they were standing right in front of him. So this is the little lost space Viking, Tony Stark said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He sauntered closer, circling the couch. Gotta say, I'm underwhelmed. I was expecting more beard. Maybe a cape. Kid, you know the cape is half the presentation, right? Stark. Captain America, Steve Rogers said, his voice a calm but firm rebuke. Give the boy some room. Can't you see he's terrified? Steve's eyes on Izuku were not analytical like Stark's or guarded like Romanov's. They were kind. They were understanding. Before anyone else could speak, the lights in the facility flickered violently. A low, powerful hum filled the air, and the floor vibrated. Izuku felt the energy in Mjolnir pulse in response, a low thrum of recognition. A column of brilliant, swirling rainbow light erupted in the center of the room, accompanied by the sound of a cosmic hurricane. It was blinding, beautiful, and terrifying. Izuku threw an arm over his face, shielding his eyes. When the light faded, a new figure stood there. He was even taller than Captain America, with a physique that seemed carved from stone. He wore gleaming silver armor over black leather, a magnificent red cape billowing behind him. His face was handsome, his jaw strong, and his eyes held the ancient wisdom of the stars. In his hand, he carried a massive, ornate battle-axe that pulsed with its own inner light. This was Thor, the god of thunder. And he looked concerned. Fury. Thor's voice boomed, deep and resonant. Heimdall showed me a vision. A boy. A storm. And my hammer. Where is... His voice trailed off as his eyes landed on the couch. He saw Izuku, a small, trembling teenager in a shredded green costume. And beside him, resting on the cushions as if it belonged there, was Mjolnir. A heavy silence descended upon the room. Tony Stark's snarky demeanor evaporated, replaced by wide-eyed fascination. Natasha Romanoff's professional calm was broken by a flicker of genuine surprise. Steve Rogers simply stared, his mind struggling to process the scene. Thor took a step forward, his gaze locked on the hammer. There was no anger in his eyes, only a profound, earth-shaking confusion. It cannot be. He walked to the couch, his presence filling the room. He looked down at Mjolnir, the weapon that had been his companion for over 1,000 years, his symbol, his birthright. He reached down, his large, calloused hand closing around the leather grip with familiar ease. Thank you for keeping it safe, little one, he said, his voice softer now, though still booming. But it is time for it to return to its master. He pulled. Nothing happened. The hammer did not move. It remained on the couch cushion, utterly, completely and disrespectfully immobile. Thor blinked. He adjusted his grip, planted his feet, and pulled again, this time with a grunt of effort. The veins in his arms stood out like thick cords of steel. The couch cushion compressed under the unyielding weight. The hammer did not budge a single millimeter. A bead of sweat trickled down Thor's temple. He let go, staring at his own hand and then back at the hammer as if he had been betrayed by both. The silence in the room was now so thick it was suffocating. Tony Stark let out a low whistle. Well, this is awkward. Thor ignored him. His gaze, now filled with a deep and staggering wonder, rose to meet Izuku's. He saw not a warrior, not a king, not a god. He saw a boy with wide, terrified green eyes filled with tears, a face smudged with dirt and grief, and hands that were bandaged and broken. And in that boy, he must have sensed something else, something the hammer had sensed, the enchantment. Thor breathed, his voice filled with awe. Odin's enchantment holds true. He looked directly at Izuku, his regal head tilting with genuine curiosity. There was no jealousy, no rage, only a deep, abiding respect that was more terrifying to Izuku than any anger could have been. The hammer has made its choice, Thor declared, his voice resonating with ancient gravity. He took a half-step back, a gesture of deference. It has judged you. He leaned in slightly, his cosmic blue eyes searching Izuku's soul. Tell me, son of Midoriya, he asked, his voice now a quiet, earnest rumble that seemed to shake the very foundations of the room. What makes you worthy? That was the question. The impossible question, and it was the one that finally broke him. The dam of composure Izuku had been so desperately trying to maintain shattered into a million pieces. The weight of Thor's question, the stares of the legendary Avengers, the sterile coldness of the room, the gnawing guilt over his friends, the crushing despair of his situation, it all came crashing down on him in one unbearable wave. A choked sob escaped his lips. And then another. The tears he had been holding back began to fall freely, hot and fast. His shoulders shook, and he curled in on himself, his body racked with tremors. Worthy? He stammered through his sobs, the translator echoing his broken Japanese. I'm not worthy of anything. He buried his face in his hands, the rough texture of his gloves scraping against his skin. The words came pouring out of him, a torrent of self-loathing and despair that he had carried for a lifetime, now laid bare before gods and legends. It's a mistake. It has to be a mistake, he cried, his voice cracking. I'm nobody. I'm just Deku. The useless, quirkless loser who got lucky. I can't even control my own power without breaking myself. How could I possibly be worthy of that? He gestured wildly at the hammer, as if it were a cursed object. His frantic gaze shot between the faces in the room, pleading for them to understand. You don't get it. While I'm sitting here, my friends are in danger. My teacher is hurt. I ran away. I was pulled away. I failed them. I was supposed to be a hero. I was supposed to be like All Might, but I left them. A worthy person wouldn't have failed. A worthy person would have saved them. He was hyperventilating now, the words tumbling over each other in a frantic, incoherent stream of guilt. He saw the USJ in his mind's eye, Aizawa's bleeding face, Tsuyu's wide, frightened eyes, the Noma's dead stare. He was supposed to be the next symbol of peace, and he couldn't even save the people right in front of him. What a joke. What a pathetic, cruel joke. Tony Stark looked uncomfortable, his usual wit failing him in the face of such raw, unfiltered anguish. Natasha's analytical gaze softened with something that might have been pity. Thor watched the boy's breakdown with a sad, profound understanding, realizing the hammer had not chosen a warrior in his prime, but a soul bearing an impossible burden. Then, a quiet movement cut through the tension. Steve Rogers stepped forward, moving past Tony and Thor. He knelt down in front of the sobbing boy, bringing himself to Izuku's level. He didn't say anything at first. He just waited, letting Izuku's storm of grief begin to subside. When Izuku's sobs quieted to ragged, hitched breaths, Steve reached out, not with the strength of a super soldier, but with a gentle, disarming kindness. He placed a steady, comforting hand on Izuku's shoulder. Izuku flinched but didn't pull away. He looked up, his tear-filled green eyes meeting Captain America's clear, steady blue ones. "I know a little something about being the little guy, son," Steve said, his voice soft but firm, imbued with a deep, unshakable empathy. The translator echoed his words gently in Izuku's ear. "Before all this," he gestured vaguely to his uniform, "I was just a skinny kid from Brooklyn. Couldn't pass a physical to save my life. I spent most of my time getting pushed around, feeling like I wasn't good enough." He gave Izuku's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "I listened to what you said. About failing. About not being strong enough. But that hammer," he nodded towards Mjolnir. "It doesn't care how strong you are. It doesn't care if you're perfect. It didn't choose Thor because he never lost a fight, and it didn't choose you because you never felt scared." Steve leaned in a little closer, his gaze unwavering and full of a powerful, simple truth. "Worthiness isn't about being perfect, Izuku. It's about what you do when things are at their worst. It's about seeing someone in trouble and running towards them, even when you're terrified, even when you know you might get hurt. From what you told us, that's exactly what you did." He offered a small, sad smile. "You didn't fail. You were in the middle of trying, and something impossible happened. There's no shame in that." Izuku stared at him, his breath catching in his throat. The words washed over him, a balm on the raw wounds of his self-doubt. To be seen, truly seen, not as a weapon or an anomaly, but as a person, it was overwhelming. The simple, profound empathy from this legendary hero was more powerful than any bolt of lightning. The tears started again, but these were different. They weren't tears of despair, but of a fragile, burgeoning relief. He didn't have to be perfect. He just had to try. He wiped his eyes with the back of his glove and gave a small, watery, almost imperceptible nod. In the silent, sterile room, surrounded by myths and billionaires, a scared boy from another world had finally found a sliver of solid ground to stand on, and it had been offered to him by a man who knew what it meant to have a hero's heart long before he had a hero's body. The transition from the sterile, subterranean confines of the S.H.I.E.L.D. facility to the gleaming pinnacle of Avengers Tower was a case of sensory whiplash. One moment, Izuku Midoriya was in a world of concrete, steel, and hushed efficiency. The next, he was ascending in a glass elevator so fast it made his stomach lurch, watching the rain-slicked tapestry of New York City spread out beneath him like a carpet of fallen stars. He stood in the center of the penthouse common room, a space so large and opulent it felt more like a futuristic museum than a living area. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking 360-degree panorama of the glittering metropolis. The furniture was sleek, minimalist, and probably cost more than his mother's entire apartment building. A fully stocked bar occupied one corner, and a series of glowing holographic interfaces shimmered in the air near a state-of-the-art lab area, cordoned off by transparent walls. He was still wearing his tattered, mud-stained hero costume, feeling deeply, profoundly out of place. He clutched Mjolnir's handle, the hammer's familiar weight a grounding presence in this surreal new reality. It was the one thing that felt truly his. "Welcome to the 8 Tower, kid," Tony Stark announced, striding into the room with a drink in his hand. He had shed his suit jacket, and now wore a vintage black Sabbath t-shirt. "Make yourself at home, don't touch my stuff. The bar is off limits. Actually, just stay on the circular rug. Let's start with that." Izuku nodded numbly, shuffling his feet so he was perfectly centered on the large, plush rug. "Tony," Steve Rogers said, following him in. He had changed into a simple Henleyan jeans, and his presence seemed to bring a sense of calm to the high-tech chaos. "He's our guest. Not a new pet. A guest with a multidimensional backstory and a magic paperweight that a literal god can't lift," Tony retorted, gesturing with his glass. "Forgive me if I want to establish some ground rules before he sneezes and accidentally opens a portal to a dimension filled with sentient tapioca." While they bickered, Izuku's mind was still reeling. He was in Avengers Tower. He was sharing air with Tony Stark and Captain America. He had met Thor. It was a fanbase fever dream turned into a terrifying reality. He felt an almost unbearable urge to whip out his hero analysis notebook, but he suspected that might be a social faux pas. The next few days blurred into a structured routine of observation and cautious integration. He was given a room, A luxurious suite with a bed softer than a cloud and a view that made his head spin. But he spent most of his time in the common areas, a quiet, wide-eyed shadow trailing in the wake of legends. And as he watched, he learned. And as he learned, they analyzed. The first to make him a project was, unsurprisingly, Tony Stark. "All right, Leprechaun lab time," Tony declared one morning, striding up to Izuku, who was nervously nibbling on a piece of toast that was, without a doubt, the best toast he had ever eaten. "I want to see what makes you tick. And by tick, I mean glow green and break things. Into the workshop." Chop chop. The workshop was Tony's sanctum sanctorum. It was a controlled storm of technology, with holographic blueprints hanging in the air, robotic arms whirring quietly as they assembled complex machinery, and the lingering smell of ozone and hot metal. Izuku stepped inside with a reverence usually reserved for temples. "JRVIS," Tony called to the air. "Run a full-spectrum bioscan on our new friend. I want everything: metabolic rate, cellular composition, energy signature. And be nice, he's a sensitive soul." "Of course, sir," a calm, British voice replied from the ceiling, startling Izuku. He was instructed to stand on a circular platform as rings of light and energy passed over his body. He stood stiffly, Mjolnir placed carefully on the floor beside him. Tony watched the data stream onto a massive holographic screen, his eyes alight with a voracious intellectual curiosity. "Fascinating," Tony muttered, zooming in on a cellular diagram. "Your biology is standard. Human baseline. A little on the small side, actually. No obvious genetic markers, no unique organs, no gamma radiation. But when you power up, as you call it," he pointed to a fluctuating graph on the screen. "There. It's not a mutation. It's an energy source, a foreign one. It's like your cells are a container, and someone's pouring pure, refined power into you." Izuku, speaking through a compiece linked to SHIELD's translation software, tried to explain. "It's called One for All. It's a quirk that stockpiles power and can be passed from one person to another." Tony's eyebrows shot up. "Passed on? Like a sourdough starter? A heroic heirloom? That's bizarre. And incredibly dangerous." He gestured to another screen showing thermal imaging. "The energy output is astronomical. When you use it, your body temperature spikes, your kinetic potential goes off the charts, and your structural integrity plummets." He brought up a wireframe model of Izuku's skeleton, highlighting the multiple hairline fractures in his fingers. "Your body can't handle the kickback. It's like trying to fire a cannonball out of a water pistol. You're tearing yourself apart with every use." Izuku looked down at his own hands, the truth of Tony's words a familiar, bitter pill. "I know. All Might, my mentor, he told me I needed to be a proper vessel. I'm not strong enough yet." "It's not about being strong enough, kid," Tony said, his voice unusually serious. "The math just doesn't work. The energy you're channeling is exponential. No amount of muscle mass is going to contain that kind of reaction without a serious containment field. You're a walking, talking cold fusion experiment with no shielding." He tapped his chin, a thoughtful, dangerous glint in his eye. "Which gives me an idea." His second education came from a much quieter, more contemplative source. He found Dr. Bruce Banner in a separate, soundproofed lab, surrounded by delicate scientific equipment and humming spectrometers. Unlike the controlled chaos of Tony's workshop, Bruce's lab was an oasis of calm precision. Bruce looked up as Izuku entered, offering a small, gentle smile. He had an aura of profound weariness, but also of deep, thoughtful intelligence. "Tony sent you, I assume?" Bruce asked, his voice soft. "He wants me to analyze the other guy in you." Izuku nodded, sitting carefully on a designated stool. He found he could relax around Bruce in a way he couldn't with Tony's overwhelming personality. They didn't start with scans or tests. They just talked. Bruce, with a quiet empathy that reminded Izuku of Captain America, asked him what it felt like. "It's warm," Izuku tried to explain, Mjolnir resting against his leg. "It feels like a sun inside me. But it's also angry. Not evil, just immense. A huge power that wants to be let out. When I use it, it's like opening a floodgate, just a tiny crack. I'm always afraid that if I open it too far, the flood will sweep me away, and everyone around me. Bruce nodded slowly, his eyes distant. He understood. Oh, he understood perfectly. The other guy, he's always there, Bruce said, his voice barely a whisper. A constant background radiation of rage. I have to stay calm. Meditate. Solve complex equations. Anything to keep him from taking the driver's seat. Because when he does, I'm not me anymore. I'm just pure, unrestrained power, and that's a terrifying thing to be. He looked at Izuku, his gaze piercing. You're afraid of hurting yourself. I'm afraid of hurting everyone else. It's two sides of the same coin, isn't it? The responsibility of wielding a power you can't fully control. That was it. That was the core of it. The crushing, suffocating weight of responsibility. Izuku felt a profound connection to this quiet, haunted man. They were both keepers of an incredible power, a power that defined them and threatened to consume them. Bruce taught him breathing exercises, meditative techniques designed to lower his heart rate and clear his mind. He explained the science of adrenaline and stress responses, giving Izuku an intellectual framework for the emotional chaos he felt in a fight. It wasn't a cure, but it was a tool. It was a way to manage the storm. Between these analytical and spiritual lessons, Izuku finally had the chance to tell his full story. He sat with Steve, Natasha, and Bruce in the common room. Thor was temporarily back on Asgard, reporting to Odin about the Mjolnir situation. He laid it all out, his quirkless childhood, the years of bullying and ridicule, the desperate dream of being a hero despite his limitations. He told them about his fateful encounter with All Might, the sludge villain incident, and the moment his idol told him, "You too can be a hero." He explained the legacy of One for All, the sacred duty to cultivate it, and one day pass it on. He spoke of Yue, of his classmates, of the drive to live up to the immense faith All Might had placed in him. Steve listened with a deep, unwavering attention, his expression one of profound respect. He saw the heart of a soldier in the boy, the same self-sacrificing spirit he'd seen in the trenches of World War II. Natasha, quiet and observant, watched his body language, listened to the hesitations in his voice. She saw past the fanboy nervousness and the teenage anxiety. She saw the core of him, the absolute, almost pathological selflessness. She saw his guilt over the USJ, the way his hands clenched when he spoke of his friends. It was a vulnerability, yes, but it was also the source of his strength. It was what made him worthy. This symbol of peace, All Might, Steve said thoughtfully after Izuku had finished. He sounds like a good man. He put a heavy burden on your shoulders, Izuku. It's the greatest honor of my life, Izuku replied without hesitation, his voice thick with emotion. I just want to be worthy of it. The conversation was interrupted by Nick Fury, who appeared on one of the large screens, his face as grim and unreadable as ever. Midoriya, Fury's voice boomed. We've been analyzing the energy signature from your arrival. Stark and Banner have been running simulations. Tony's face appeared in a smaller window. And by running simulations, he means I've been doing the heavy lifting while Brucey Bear makes sure my math doesn't accidentally create a black hole in the middle of Manhattan. Bruce's face popped up next. The energy is unique, but unstable. It left a residual trail, but it's like trying to follow a single set of footprints in a hurricane. The trail is decaying rapidly. Fury's expression was stark. The point is this: finding a way to replicate the conditions that brought you here is difficult. Maybe impossible. We have no map, no coordinates for your dimension. For now you're stuck here. The words hit Izuku like a physical blow. Stuck here. The fragile hope he had been nursing, the idea that these brilliant people could just whip up a portal and send him home, dissolved into dust. His world, his mother, All Might, they were on the other side of an impassable cosmic ocean. He felt the floor drop out from under him. He must have looked as devastated as he felt, because Steve placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. We're not giving up, son. We're just managing expectations. It was Tony, however, who provided the most unexpected form of comfort. He walked over to where Izuku was standing, looking him up and down with a critical eye. Well, if you're going to be sticking around, Tony said, you can't keep walking around looking like a busted piñata. Your costume is a tactical nightmare. Canvas and cotton? Are you kidding me? You're lucky you didn't get snagged on a nail and bleed out. He gestured for Izuku to follow him back to the lab. On a central platform, a mannequin stood shrouded in a white sheet. I took the liberty of running with the data from my scans, Tony said, a proud smirk on his face. Figured I'd upgrade your pajamas. JRVIS, reveal Project Bunny Hop. I believe you decided on the designation Emerald Guardian, sir. The AI corrected politely. Right, that one's better. Do that one. With a dramatic flare, robotic arms descended and whipped the sheet away. Izuku gasped. It was still unmistakably his costume, but it had been reborn. The base color was the same familiar, deep forest green, but the material was a high-tech, carbon fiber weave that looked both flexible and incredibly durable. The clumsy white smile guard had been replaced by a sleek, retractable metal respirator that integrated seamlessly into the cowl. The iconic long-eared cowl was still there, but it was more streamlined, embedded with communication arrays and threat detection sensors. Light, articulated armor plates protected his torso, shoulders, and knees, all colored a darker shade of green. His bulky red belt had been replaced with a more practical, tactical one, equipped with pouches for first aid and support gear. And his red boots were now reinforced, with shock-absorbing soles. It was a perfect fusion of his own identity and Stark-level innovation. It was a suit that said, I am a hero, not I am a kid in a costume. It's amazing, Izuku breathed, tracing a finger along one of the armored plates. The fabric is a proprietary blend, Tony explained, beaming. Nomex Kevlar biweave with a micron-scale vibranium mesh. It's bullet-resistant, blade-resistant, and fire-retardant. It'll also help disperse some of the kinetic blowback from your thing. Won't solve the problem, but it'll keep you from shattering every time you throw a super punch. He pointed to the gauntlets. These are reinforced to give your arms more support. Think of them as high-tech compression sleeves. Izuku looked up at Tony, his eyes shining with unshed tears of gratitude. Why? Why would you do all this for me? Tony shrugged, trying to look nonchalant, but for a split second, Izuku saw something else in his eyes, a flicker of understanding, maybe even kinship. The look of a man who had built his own armor to protect a vulnerable heart. Let's just say I have a soft spot for kids with overwhelming power and a hero complex, Tony said, clapping him on the back. Now go try it on. We've got a training session scheduled. The big guy's back, and he's curious to see what his hammer's new boyfriend can do. The big guy was waiting for them in the tower's massive, state-of-the-art training room. The space could be programmed to simulate any environment, but for now, it was a wide-open expanse of reinforced flooring. Thor stood in the center, Mjolnir now resting on a pedestal nearby. He wore simple training gear, his red cape absent, but his divine presence was no less palpable. Izuku walked in, now clad in his new Emerald Guardian suit. It fit like a second skin, moving with him, empowering him. He felt professional. He felt like he belonged. Ah, young Midoriya! Thor boomed, his voice echoing in the vast space. A fine suit of armor. Stark's work is gaudy, but effective. I heard that, Point Break. Tony's voice squawked over the room's intercom. Thor chuckled and turned his attention to Izuku. I have spoken with the Allfather. He is intrigued. He confirms the hammer's enchantment is absolute. It has chosen you for reasons that are your own, but a warrior must know his weapon. It is not enough to simply lift Mjolnir. You must learn to commune with it. Izuku nodded, his expression serious. He walked over to Mjolnir, his hand closing around its handle. The familiar, comforting thrum of power flowed into him. He lifted it with ease. Good, Thor said. Now Mjolnir is more than a hammer. It is a conduit for the storm. Feel the sky. Feel the ozone in the air. Reach out with your will and call the lightning to you. Izuku closed his eyes, trying to do as Thor said. He focused, trying to feel the energy in the air, but his mind was a jumble of anxieties. He could feel one for all buzzing under his skin, a familiar sea of power, but the sky felt distant and alien. He gritted his teeth, squeezing the handle, but nothing happened. You are trying too hard, Thor advised. You are trying to command it. Do not command. Ask. It is your partner, not your servant. Izuku took a deep breath, remembering Bruce's calming exercises. He cleared his mind, focusing only on the weight of the hammer in his hand and the low hum of its power. He didn't try to force it, he just opened himself to the possibility. He imagined a spark, a single flicker of blue light. Crackle. A tiny, brilliant blue spark jumped from the head of the hammer to a nearby wall panel, leaving a small black scorch mark. Izuku's eyes flew open. He'd done it! It was small, pathetic even, but it was a start. Yes! Thor roared with laughter. There! You see? The connection is there! Again, for the next hour Thor drilled him. He taught him how to swing the hammer not with his arm, but with his whole body, using the momentum to create powerful, flowing movements. He showed him how to throw it, and, with an outstretched hand and a deep-seated belief, will it to return to him. The first time Izuku threw Mjolnir, and it actually flew back into his waiting palm, he let out a whoop of pure, unadulterated joy. He was learning. He was growing. But the final piece of the puzzle was still missing. Now for the true test, Thor said, his expression growing serious. Your power, the one for all. Stark tells me it is destroying you. I wonder, what happens when two storms meet inside a vessel forged to contain them? He gestured to a line of high-density tungsten targets at the far end of the room. Strike it, Thor commanded. But do not strike with just your arm, or with just the hammer. Strike with both. Channel your inner storm through the hammer. Let Mjolnir be your shield against your own power. Izuku's heart began to pound. This was the moment of truth. He took his stance, the one All Might had taught him, a low crouch bubbling with potential energy. The familiar green lightning of One for All began to crackle around him, but this time, he didn't let it build in his arm. He focused on the feeling of Mjolnir in his hand, on the connection he had just forged. He imagined the green energy flowing out of his body, not as an explosion, but as a river. A river flowing into the sea that was Mjolnir, One for All. 20%. He screamed, the number higher than he'd ever dared to use in a focused attack. He lunged forward, swinging the hammer in a powerful arc. The moment he unleashed the power, he felt it. The green lightning surged down his arm, raw and untamed. In the past, this was the point where he would have felt the searing agony of his bones fracturing. But not this time. The URU metal of Mjolnir seemed to drink the energy thirstily. The intricate patterns on its surface flared with a brilliant emerald light. The hammer, already a conduit for cosmic lightning, accepted the volatile energy of One for All without protest. It didn't just contain it, it harmonized with it. The green lightning of legacy and the blue lightning of divinity swirled together around the hammer's head, creating a spectacular, blinding vortex of green and blue power. The hammer struck the tungsten target. The resulting explosion was not just a sound, it was a physical event. A cataclysmic boom rocked the entire tower. The target didn't just break or shatter. It atomized. It was simply gone, replaced by a wave of pure kinetic and electrical force that washed across the room, leaving the smell of a thunderstorm in its wake. Izuku was thrown back several feet, landing in a crouch. He looked down at his arm, his chest heaving. There was no pain. No broken bones. No shattered ligaments. There was only a pleasant, tingling warmth and the echo of immense power. He had done it. He had unleashed 20% of his power and was completely unharmed. Thor stared at the spot where the target had been, his jaw agape. In the observation booth, Tony Stark nearly dropped his tablet. JRVIS, Tony breathed. Did you get that? Replayed the energy readings. The energy output was significant, sir. The AI replied, its calm voice laced with what might have been digital surprise. Exponentially greater than the sum of its parts. In the training room, Thor let out a roar of triumphant laughter that shook the very windows. He strode over and clapped Izuku on the back with enough force to send him stumbling forward. By Odin's beard! Thor bellowed, his eyes shining with pride and excitement. You see, boy? You see? Mjolnir is not just your weapon. It is your focus. It is your shield. It is the key. Izuku looked from his unharmed arm to the humming hammer in his hand, and for the first time since being ripped from his world, the suffocating weight of his despair began to lift. He was stuck here, yes, he was lost. But he wasn't helpless. And he wasn't alone. He had found a new power, a new purpose, and a new, impossibly strange, and unbelievably powerful family. His education in heroism had just begun. The discovery of the synergy between One for All and Mjolnir was a paradigm shift. It was the missing variable in an impossible equation, the key that unlocked a door Izuku Midoriya didn't even know he was standing in front of. The days that followed were an electric whirlwind of training, a crucible designed to forge a new kind of hero from the raw materials of two worlds. The Avengers Tower training room, a cavernous space of shifting holograms and reinforced alloys, became his sanctuary and his proving ground. His primary instructor, his mentor in the art of divine warfare, was Thor. The god of thunder approached Izuku's training with a boisterous, infectious enthusiasm, a stark contrast to the grim, desperate tutelage of the skeletal All Might. Where All Might had taught him to be a vessel, to grit his teeth and endure the pain of his power, Thor taught him to be a conduit, to rejoice in the storm and let it flow through him. No, no, young Midoriya! Thor's voice boomed, echoing off the walls. They stood in a holographic simulation of a rocky Asgardian plain under a perpetually twilight sky. You swing the hammer as if you are angry at it. It is not your enemy. It is your partner. You do not command the thunder. You dance with it. Izuku, panting and drenched in sweat despite the advanced cooling system in his new suit, reset his stance. He was trying to replicate one of Thor's signature moves, a spinning throw that sent Mjolnir careening around multiple targets before returning to his hand. His own attempts had been clumsy, the hammer either wobbling pathetically or flying off at an awkward angle, forcing him to sheepishly call it back. Focus not on the throw, Thor advised, pacing before him like a magnificent, golden-haired lion. Focus on the return. Know in your heart, in your very soul, that it will come back to you. The throw is merely the beginning of the journey home. Mjolnir is loyal. It desires to be in the hand of the worthy. Trust in its desire. Izuku closed his eyes, taking a deep, calming breath as Bruce had taught him. He ignored the holographic training drones zipping through the air. He focused on the hammer in his hand. He felt its weight, its texture, the latent hum of cosmic power within the Uru metal. He didn't think of it as a weapon. He thought of it as a friend. A loyal, powerful, slightly stubborn friend. He opened his eyes, a new resolve hardening his features. He began to spin, not with the frantic energy of a novice, but with a smooth, centrifugal force that started in his heels and flowed up through his core. He let go at the apex of the spin. Mjolnir shot forward, no longer wobbling, but spinning like a discus, a perfect, stable spiral of gray metal. Crack! It slammed into the first drone, obliterating it in a shower of sparks. But it didn't stop. It ricocheted, its path seemingly impossible, and smashed into a second, then a third. It was as if the hammer had its own intelligence, calculating the trajectory with divine precision. After striking the fourth and final drone, it curved gracefully through the air and slapped back into Izuku's outstretched palm with a satisfying, resonant thump. A wide, incredulous grin spread across Izuku's face. He had done it. Yes! Thor roared, clapping his hands together with the force of a thunderclap. That is the way of it! You are learning, little brother! You are learning the Song of the Storm. The moniker Little Brother had started casually, but it had stuck. Thor, an immortal prince with a little brother he had a complicated and often violent relationship with, had found in Izuku a kindred spirit he could mentor without the baggage of Asgardian royal drama. He saw in Izuku's earnest, self-sacrificing nature a purity that reminded him of the hero he himself had always striven to be, before arrogance and pride had led him astray. For Izuku, who had grown up an only child and worshipped an idol from afar, Thor's open, boisterous affection was a powerful, affirming force. Their training sessions were a spectacle of light and sound. Thor taught Izuku how to summon lightning, not just as a single, blinding bolt, but as a controlled cascade of electricity, a defensive field of crackling energy, or a focused arc to chain between enemies. He taught him to strike the ground with Mjolnir to create localized shockwaves, and how to spin the hammer above his head to generate winds strong enough to deflect projectiles. And most importantly, he taught him how to fly Flight is not merely pointing yourself at the sky and holding on, Thor explained as they stood on the tower's highest balcony, the wind whipping at them. It is an act of will. Mjolnir will pull you, but you must guide it. It is like riding a wild horse. You do not break its spirit, you become one with its spirit. Izuku's first few attempts were comical. He would throw the hammer and hold on, being yanked into the air in a flailing, undignified arc before crashing back onto the reinforced landing pad. He oversteered, understeered, and at one point, ended up spinning in a helpless circle like a lawn sprinkler. But he was a fast learner. His analytical mind, the same one that filled notebooks with detailed observations of hero techniques, began to break the process down. He learned to use subtle shifts in his weight, small adjustments of the hammer's angle, to control his ascent, his speed, his direction. Within a week, he was no longer just being dragged by the hammer. He was flying with it. He soared through the simulated skies of the training room, a green and blue comet, whooping with a joy so pure it made the stoic Natasha Romanoff crack a small smile from the observation deck. But it wasn't all thunder and lightning. His education was rounded out by the grounded, tactical genius of Captain America. If Thor was teaching him how to be a storm, Steve Rogers was teaching him how to be a soldier. Power is a line, Steve said, standing opposite Izuku in a holographic boxing ring. He held his iconic vibranium shield. Strategy is a circle. It surrounds the line, directs it, and ultimately contains it. You have more raw power than almost anyone I've ever met, Izuku. But raw power that isn't aimed correctly is just noise. Your enemies will use that against you. Their sessions were a stark contrast to Thor's bombastic lessons. They were quiet, focused, and intensely physical. Steve drilled him on fundamentals, footwork, parrying, blocking, creating openings. He was relentless, his movements economical and brutally efficient. He would disarm Izuku, trip him, force him onto the defensive, all without breaking a sweat. You're relying too much on the hammer, Steve pointed out after sweeping Izuku's legs out from under him for the third time. He offered a hand up. It's your greatest weapon, but if it becomes your only weapon, it's your greatest weakness. What happens if you're disarmed? What if you're in a tight space where you can't swing it? He taught Izuku to use Mjolnir as a defensive tool, an extension of his own body. He showed him how to block attacks with the flat of the hammer, how to use the handle to trap an opponent's limb, how to use its weight as a counterbalance for his own movements. He taught him to fight with his fists, his feet, his elbows, to be a weapon, not just to hold one. The shield is an extension of my will, Steve explained, tapping the vibranium disc. But I am a soldier first. You must be a hero first. The hammer is the tool you use to do your job. This philosophy was the missing piece Izuku needed. His own style, born from emulating All Might, had been straightforward, a singular, overwhelming punch. Now, he was learning to think in 3 dimensions, to weave offense and defense together, to see the battlefield not as a single opponent, but as a complex, shifting chessboard. The true breakthrough, however, came when they combined these disciplines. It was during a particularly grueling simulation. Tony had programmed a scenario based on the Chitauri invasion of New York, and Izuku was tasked with defending a designated area against overwhelming odds. He was flying, throwing the hammer, calling down lightning, but the holographic aliens just kept coming. He was getting tired, his movements becoming sloppy. You're fighting them one at a time, Midoriya. Steve's voice crackled over the comms from the observation booth. You're a sledgehammer trying to stop a river. You need to be a dam. Use the environment. Control the battlefield, Thor's voice followed. Unleash the storm, little brother. Don't just fight them, awe them. Let them fear the thunder. Izuku was cornered, 3 Chitauri soldiers bearing down on him. He was out of breath, his arm aching from the strain. He was about to be overwhelmed. In that moment of desperation, a dozen different lessons from his mentors clicked into place at once. Power is a line. Strategy is a circle. Be a dam. Unleash the storm. Let Mjolnir be your shield. He didn't just think. He acted. He slammed Mjolnir into the ground. Smash! He yelled, the word of familiar comfort. But this time, he didn't channel one for all into a punch. He channeled a controlled 15% burst into the hammer's impact with the floor. The result was not a crater, but a targeted shockwave. The ground beneath the Chitauri buckled and split, sending them stumbling. It was the opening he needed. He spun, swinging Mjolnir in a low arc, channeling OFA into the momentum. Delaware! Smash! The move was no longer a finger flick, channeled through the hammer. It became a directed blast of concussive force, a cannonball of pure air that sent one of the aliens tumbling end over end. He didn't stop to admire his work. He threw Mjolnir, not at an enemy, but at a thick concrete pillar at the far end of the plaza. As it ricocheted, he leaped into the air, his own OFA-enhanced jump carrying him skyward. He held out his hand, and Mjolnir, now trailing crackling blue lightning, slammed back into his grip in midair. Now airborne, he raised the hammer to the sky. "Thor!" he yelled, though his teacher was not beside him. "For you!" He channeled his will, his focus, his intent into the hammer, and the sky and the simulation responded. Dark clouds coalesced, and a bolt of brilliant blue lightning lanced down, striking the hammer. But Izuku did something new, something instinctive. As the divine energy flowed into Mjolnir, he met it with his own. He pushed a steady, controlled 10% of one for all into the hammer, not as a punch, but as a sustained current. The green and blue energies met and merged into a blinding, swirling torrent of power. He roared, swinging the hammer down. It didn't release a bolt of lightning. It unleashed a wave, a wide, sweeping arc of emerald and azure energy that washed over the remaining Chitauri, overloading their systems and sending them crashing to the ground in a shower of sparks. He landed in a perfect three-point stance, the hammer humming with residual power, his chest heaving. The simulation ended, the last of the holograms fading away. The training room fell silent. In the observation booth, no one spoke for a moment. Tony Stark stared at the energy readings on his screen, his mouth slightly agape. Steve had a look of quiet, profound pride on his face. Thor was on his feet, a grin of pure, unadulterated delight splitting his features. "He did it," Natasha murmured, a rare note of awe in her voice. "He's not just using their techniques. He's combining them. He's creating his own." Izuku had synthesized the overwhelming power of Thor with the tactical precision of Captain America, and channeled it all through the unique engine of One for All. He wasn't just Midoriya with a hammer anymore. He wasn't a cheap copy of Thor. He was something new. He began naming his new techniques, a habit from his world that the Avengers found endearing. The ground-pound shockwave became Oklahoma Smash, a tribute to the earth-shaking power it produced. The spinning, lightning-infused hammer throw was the Asgardian Cyclone, the flying tackle, where he would throw the hammer and then launch himself after it to catch it mid-flight for a powerful impact, was the Stark-Spangled Strike. A name that made Tony laugh and Steve groan, but his signature move, the one that truly showcased his potential, was the one he had discovered in the Chitauri simulation. He refined it, learning to control the output with terrifying precision. He called it Delaware Dynamo. He would spin Mjolnir to create a vortex, a miniature tornado, and then infuse it with a sustained, symbiotic flow of both Thor's lightning and One for All's raw power. The result was a controllable, devastating storm of green and blue energy that he could direct at his enemies. It was a perfect fusion of his two worlds, his two powers, his two mentors. The training was pushing him to his physical and mental limits, but it was also healing him. The frantic desperation was being replaced by a quiet confidence. The guilt of his failure at the USJ was still there, a cold stone in his gut, but it was no longer a paralyzing weight. It was a fuel, a reminder of what he was fighting for, a reason to get stronger. He was being reforged in the fires of Avengers Tower, and he was coming out stronger, sharper, and more whole. He was no longer just Izuku Midoriya, the inheritor of One for All. He was no longer just a boy who could lift Mjolnir. He was both. He was a hero in training, learning to fight for all he held dear, for his home world and for the new family he had found in this one. He was fighting for All Might and for Asgard, and he was just getting started. The cacophony of battle, the roar of divine thunder, and the hum of Stark technology had become the soundtrack to Izuku Midoriya's new life. His days were a whirlwind of punishing training simulations, complex scientific analyses, and the constant, thrumming awareness of the two immense powers coiling within him. He was becoming stronger, faster, more proficient with his incredible gifts than he had ever dreamed possible. But he was also exhausted, a deep, so weary exhaustion that no amount of sleep in his luxurious, king-sized bed could fully erase. He was a warrior in training, an avenger in waiting. But he was also a 15-year-old boy, ripped from his home, his mother, and his friends, living in a gilded cage at the top of the world. The quiet day began, as most days did, with the rising sun painting the skyscrapers of Manhattan in hues of soft gold and rose. Izuku stood on the main balcony of the penthouse common floor, a steaming mug of hot chocolate, a small comfort Tony insisted was scientifically formulated for teenage angst, cupped in his hands. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and sweatpants, a loaner from the tower's endless supply of apparel. For a few precious moments, he wasn't the wielder of Mjolnir or the inheritor of One for All. He was just Izuku, watching a city that was not his own wake up. He missed the sounds of his neighborhood. The distant rumble of the train, the cheerful chatter of his neighbors, the specific, comforting clatter of his mother cooking breakfast in the kitchen. Here, the sounds were different, the endless chorus of sirens, the muted roar of traffic from 1,000 feet below, the whisper of the wind against the tower's windows. It was a symphony of loneliness. The view's something else, isn't it? Izuku nearly jumped out of his skin, sloshing hot chocolate onto his hand. He turned to see Natasha Romanoff leaning against the doorframe, as silent as a shadow. She was dressed in simple black athletic wear, a half-empty mug of coffee in her hand. Her expression was, as usual, unreadable, but her presence wasn't threatening. It was just there. "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you," Izuku stammered, using the calmer piece that had become a permanent fixture. "No one ever does," she replied with a ghost of a smile, walking to stand beside him at the railing. She didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the sprawling city below. "You can see everything from up here, all the people, rushing to their jobs, living their lives. It all looks so orderly from a distance." She took a sip of her coffee. "It's a lie, of course. Down there, it's chaos. Messy. Complicated." Izuku wasn't sure what to say. He had learned that Natasha rarely spoke without a purpose. Her words were like her movements, precise, economical, and always with a specific goal in mind. "You fought well in the simulations yesterday," she continued, her tone conversational. "Your new move, the dynamo one. It's effective, but your eyes..." She finally turned to look at him, and her green eyes were sharp, analytical, missing nothing. "You look like you're a million miles away." Izuku's shoulders slumped. He couldn't hide anything from her. She saw right through the burgeoning confidence, right through the spectacular power, and saw the scared, homesick kid underneath. "A different dimension, actually," he murmured, trying for a small joke, but it fell flat. He sighed, looking down into his mug. I worry. All the time. I see my teacher, Aizawa-sensei, his face after the Nomu attacked him. I see Tsu. Ajiri, her eyes when she thought she was going to die. And I wasn't there. I vanished. What did they think? Did they think I ran? That I abandoned them? Does my mother even know I'm alive? Does All Might, does he think he made a mistake choosing me?" The confession tumbled out of him, a quiet cascade of the fears that haunted him in the silent hours of the night. Natasha listened without interruption, her expression unchanging. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment, simply watching the city. Izuku braced himself for a platitude, a simple, "Don't worry," or a, "Focus on your training." "When I was young," she said instead, her voice low and even, "I was part of a program. The Red Room. They took girls and broke them. They turned us into weapons, into spies. They made us do things, terrible things. To graduate, they sterilized us. A final ceremony to ensure we could never have a life beyond the mission. To make sure the only family we would ever have was the one they gave us." Izuku stared at her, his own troubles momentarily forgotten, shocked by the sudden, brutal honesty. This wasn't a story she told lightly. "For a long time," she continued, her gaze distant, "all I saw was the red. The red in my ledger, the blood on my hands. I thought it defined me. I thought that's all I would ever be. A weapon, a monster in the shape of a woman. She finally looked at him, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of the profound, ancient pain she carried. Clint Barton was sent to kill me. He made a different call. He saw something else. He gave me a choice. She took a final sip of her coffee. Being a hero isn't about being perfect, Izuku. It's not about never failing or never being afraid. It's not about the powers you have. It's about the choices you make, every single day. You wake up, you look at the red in your ledger, and you choose to do something good anyway. You choose to wipe some of it away. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly gentle. You didn't choose to leave your friends. You were taken. The only choice you made that day was to run towards danger to save someone. That's not a choice a coward makes. It's the only choice a hero can make. She gave his shoulder a slight squeeze and then turned to leave. Don't let the past poison the present, she said over her shoulder. You can't help them from here right now, but you can get strong enough so that when you do get back, you can protect them better than ever before. She disappeared back into the tower's interior, leaving Izuku alone on the balcony, her words echoing in the morning air. It wasn't a comforting speech. It was hard, cold, and edged with a pain he could barely comprehend. But it was also the most reassuring thing anyone had said to him. It was real. She hadn't tried to erase his guilt. She had given him a way to reframe it. It wasn't a mark of failure. It was a motivation. Later that day, seeking a different kind of quiet, Izuku found his way to the tower's library. It was a space that felt like it belonged more to Steve Rogers than Tony Stark. It was filled with actual, physical books, the shelves made of dark, rich wood. The air smelled of old paper and leather. Steve was there, sitting in a worn armchair, sketching in a small notebook. Captain Rogers? Izuku asked tentatively from the doorway. Steve looked up and smiled, a warm, genuine expression that instantly put Izuku at ease. Izuku. Come on in. And please call me Steve. Izuku walked in, Mjolnir held in his hand. He still carried it everywhere, a security blanket forged from a dying star. He looked at the sketchbook in Steve's hands. I didn't know you could draw. Just a hobby, Steve said, holding it up. The page was filled with a remarkably detailed sketch of a soaring hawk. Helps me think. Helps me catch up. He gestured to the shelves around them. There's a lot of world to catch up on. Izuku understood that feeling all too well. He pulled out his own notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 14, now filled with frantic scribbles about the Avengers, and a pencil. He sat in a chair opposite Steve, and for a while, they sat in a comfortable silence, the only sound the soft scratch of their pencils on paper. Izuku wasn't drawing a hawk. He was sketching his friends. He drew Uraraka's round, cheerful face, her zero-gravity quirk making her hair float around her. He drew Ida's stern, determined expression, his calf engines gleaming. He drew a small, explosive caricature of Bakugo, yelling as usual. And finally, he drew a larger picture of All Might in his prime, his signature V-shaped antennae hair prominent, his smile a beacon of hope. Steve glanced over. Your friends? Izuku nodded, a lump forming in his throat. My classmates. And my hero. He's the one who gave you your powers, right? All Might? Steve asked gently. Yes. He chose me. He chose well, Steve said simply, without a hint of doubt. I've seen you train, Izuku. I've seen your heart. You have the same fire I saw in the best men I ever knew, the ones who would throw themselves on a grenade to save their squad. He paused, his gaze growing distant as he looked back at his own drawing. You know, the papers back in the 40s, they called me a hero, a symbol. But I was just a guy from Brooklyn who didn't like bullies. That's all it ever started with. He looked back at Izuku, his blue eyes clear and direct. You feel the weight of his legacy, I know. But a legacy isn't a cage. It's a foundation. You don't have to be the next All Might, you just have to be the first Izuku Midoriya. And from what I've seen, that's more than enough. The simple, unshakable faith from this legendary man was like a shield, warding off the whispers of self-doubt. He wasn't a failure. He wasn't a replacement. He was a successor. And he was here, learning from the first Avenger. The thought was staggering. His quiet day of reflection was inevitably, and loudly, interrupted by Tony Stark. "There you are, Green Goblin!" Tony announced, striding into the library with a tablet in hand. "Stop all this quiet contemplation. It's unnerving. We've got science to do." He led Izuku to the tower's astronomy deck, a circular room where the ceiling was a massive, high-definition dome currently displaying a perfect, real-time map of the night sky above New York. "JRVIS," Tony commanded. "Isolate constellations. Start with the northern hemisphere." The star map shimmered, and bright lines connected the dots, forming familiar shapes: Ursa Major, Cassiopeia, Orion. "All right, kid," Tony said, gesturing to the dome. "You're a hero nerd. You must know your stars. Show me a constellation you recognize from your world. If we can find a celestial discrepancy, even a minor one, it might give us a baseline to calculate the dimensional drift. It's a long shot, but it's better than nothing." Izuku's heart leaped with a sudden, desperate hope. He stared up at the star map, his eyes scanning the familiar patterns. He had spent countless nights on his own apartment balcony, looking up at the sky, dreaming of being a hero. He knew these stars, but as he looked closer, a cold dread began to seep into him. Orion was there, but the stars in his belt, Aunatak, Aunalam, Mintaka, were just slightly off. The spacing was different, the brightness subtly altered. He looked for Polaris, the North Star, but the star in its place was a dimmer, slightly redder celestial body. It was all wrong. It was like looking at a masterful forgery of a painting he knew by heart. The overall picture was the same, but every brushstroke was different. I don't," he stammered, his hope crumbling. "It's all different. It's close, but it's not the same." Tony's expression softened slightly, a rare crack in his bravado. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I was afraid of that." He shut the star map off, plunging the room into a soft, dim light. "Different universal constants. Different stellar evolution. We're not just in another place, kid. We're in a whole new rulebook." The crushing weight of his situation slammed back into Izuku with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just a matter of distance. He was in a fundamentally different reality. The very stars he had wished upon were gone. He was more lost than he had ever imagined. He sank into a chair, the full, cosmic scale of his isolation washing over him. He felt impossibly small, an insignificant speck adrift in an infinite, alien sea. He buried his face in his hands, trying to fight back a fresh wave of despair. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Tony. "Hey," Tony said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I know this is a lot. Believe me, finding out you're not the center of the universe, or even in your own universe, is a tough pill to swallow." He pulled up a chair. "But look, despairing isn't a strategy. It's just wallowing. So, what's the mission?" Izuku looked up, confused. "The mission? Yeah, the mission," Tony repeated, tapping his temple. "Every hero needs a mission. Yours was become a hero like All Might. Okay, fine. Good start. But we need specifics. Actionable goals. What's step 1? Get stronger, Izuku said, the words coming automatically from his training. Good. That's a start. What else? Learn to control my powers better. We're doing that. What's the ultimate goal? The big one? Get home, Izuku whispered. There it is, Tony said, nodding. That's the endgame. Get home. Now we work backward from there. We don't know how to get you home yet. It's a problem with 1,000 variables and no data, so we put that on the back burner. We focus on the variables we can control. We get you stronger. We master your powers. We turn you into the most capable, adaptable, powerhouse of a hero this world or yours has ever seen. So that when we do find a way back, you're not going back as the scared kid who got pulled through a portal. You're going back as a hero who can end the fight he left behind. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. You feel guilty about your friends? Use it. You feel homesick? Use it. You miss your mom? Use it. Let it drive you. Don't let it drown you. That's how you win. Izuku stared at him, seeing past the billionaire playboy philanthropist. He saw the man who had been trapped in a cave with a box of scraps and had built his way out. He saw the man who had flown a nuclear missile into a wormhole to save a city he barely seemed to care about. Tony Stark wasn't just a genius. He was a survivor. And he was teaching Izuku how to survive, too. Suddenly, a red alert klaxon blared through the tower, startling them both. The soft lighting was replaced by flashing crimson lights. "What now?" Tony groaned, standing up as Jarvis's voice filled the room. "Sir, Director Fury is on a priority channel," the AI announced. "He says it is urgent." Nick Fury's face appeared on the dome above them, his expression grim, his single eye seeming to glower down at them. "Stark! Midoriya! We've got a hit. A hit on what? A new shawarma place?" Tony quipped, but there was a new tension in his voice. "We've detected a dimensional energy spike," Fury said, his voice deadly serious. "A perfect match for the signature that brought the kid here. It's faint, but it's stable. And we've triangulated the source." A map appeared on the dome, zooming in on a remote, mountainous region in Eastern Europe. A red circle pulsed over a specific location. "Sokovia," Fury stated. "Inside a known, heavily fortified Hydra research facility." Izuku shot to his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs. A clue. A real, tangible clue. The first thread he could pull to unravel the knot of his predicament. The quiet day was officially, and irrevocably, over. Hope, fierce and sharp, surged through him, chasing away the shadows of his despair. This was it. This was the next step in the mission.